Well, at the moment, it probably doesn't mean very much, but what it will mean in the very near future is a lot of businesses that we rely on for goods, services and employment are going to be finding it very tough. So, the government is focused on making sure that we have as smooth and wide a pathway out of this recession created by external forces.
Is this as bad as it gets?
This is about as bad as it gets, Pete. Essentially, when you have all major economies downturning at the same time in a very short period of time, is as bad as it gets in terms of economic events.
Okay, we saw Matthias Cormann, trying to get on the front foot this morning before that grim news comes out, saying, well, we're not doing as bad as other countries. I guess he's got a point there, but still it's of little comfort to so many people who've lost their jobs, right?
It will be of little comfort to them, that's quite true. But when you compare Australia's economy, which most economists are saying that we should see a downturn of around 5 to 6%, in the UK they've had a 20% decline, in the US it's around 10%, and the declines just go on and on around the world. Australia's contraction in economic activity looks pretty mild by comparison. But that's really history. The thing that we need to focus on is the future and how we get back to growth and sustainable growth as quickly as possible.
Well, a few points on that. First of all, the RBA is sending in another $100 billion worth in cheap loans for businesses at the moment. What sort of an impact can that have?
Well, that's going to be critical, because where things get really bad in your economy is when your payment system and your lending system start drying up. So the RBA's emergency loan facility encourages financial institutions, or allows financial institutions, to continue the flow of credit into the economy. And that's what we're trying to do, or that's what they're trying to do. So that's a critical element to making sure that the decline isn't any worse, and once again that we get out of this as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and how much does this, if at all, affect the debate at the moment for open borders? I mean, the Prime Minister is trying to persuade the Victorian Premier, New South Wales Premier, to get things going by Christmas. He's not having much luck in Queensland and elsewhere. But does this kind of energise that debate at the moment?
I think that debate's never been more critical. I mean, at a time when we need to be pulling on every single lever we possibly can, because as you correctly pointed out, these are just figures. There are real people behind those figures whose jobs are in jeopardy, whose houses, whose families, who rely on their income, are being put at risk. So we can't afford to be playing politics with borders. The premiers need to be obviously listening to health advice, but not playing popular politics at the moment, and opening those borders for the good of everyone. Just
a couple of quick issues before you go, Jason. Tony Abbott, he's kicked up a hornet's nest this morning when it comes to his thoughts on borders. It kind of is a part of that argument anyway. Just wondering if you've managed to catch them and if you agree with them or not.
I haven't read his speech, to be honest, but I don't think that any Australian would like to feel that their lives are worth less than someone else's. I certainly know that I don't want to be in that particular category. So, I think the broader point, though, about whether the measures we're taking, for example, closing borders instead of looking at individual hotspots, is an overreaction and is costing more than it's doing good in terms of health terms. They're reasonable questions to ask.
Well, I mean, one of the quotes he said too, and there's quite a few of them, he said, we've all had 6 months, surely it's time to relax the rules so that individuals can take personal responsibility and make more of their own decisions about the risks. Does he have a point in that regard?
Yeah, I think he does, actually. I think that there is a point about where governments are just basically telling people for your own good, you need to stay at home, even when they're in very low-risk categories, even when they're in parts of Australia that haven't had a COVID case or have no active COVID cases. I think that that's pretty heavy-handed, to be honest.
Yeah, and just finally, John Barilaro, he reckons that the Sydney's New Year's Eve fireworks spectacular, well, it can't go ahead. Can't go ahead this year. The Tamworth Country Music Festival's off in the country region, so why should Sydney have its own fireworks? Do you agree with him?
Well, John's pretty spectacular, I've got to say. But look, I think the fireworks might be more spectacular.
What's in spectacular in what regard?
Oh, I think he's been on your program, Pete. He's a pretty good performer.
No.
But look, I think the fireworks are such a major event for Australia, both here, but more importantly overseas in terms of being an attraction for other people. Now, everyone will say, well, no one can come to Australia at the moment anyway, but you never take your foot off the gas in terms of making sure that you're prominent in people's thinkings about where they're going to go for their next holiday. And look, as I say, you know, at a time when we can't be not pulling every lever we can in terms of sustainable growth, I think that this is something that we should do. And whether we need to manage the crowds differently, that's a separate question.
Yeah.